Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go forward. We have two more presenters here, and we've definitely saved some of the best for last. We have a Deputy District Attorney, Miss Rena Durant, who is going to discuss her opinions of what's going on. Miss Durant.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So again, my opinions only, not the opinions of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. I've been a deputy DA for 11 and a half years. I'm currently running one of the busiest courtrooms, I think, in the country. But before that, I spent a large part of my career prosecuting sex crimes, child abuse, and domestic violence cases, and working alongside victims. And I just want to take a poll of how many people in this room are trial attorneys who work with juries. Okay, a decent number. So for those of you who don't do that, and for those of you who aren't attorneys here, you may not realize that what we do as trial attorneys is we tell stories. And that's our bread and butter as trial attorneys, is telling stories. We also live in a city that is based on telling stories, and we're in Hollywood right now. So I think a lot of people we surround ourselves with make their bread and butter by telling stories. And why am I bringing this up? I'm supposed to be the DA just telling you and getting pissed off and telling you stuff. Because the staircase to me is a story. It is not truth. And I think a lot of us want to watch these true crime shows because we want truth. If we just wanted a story, we'd go out and watch some crappy thing in the theater. But we're expecting truth. So what I would like to point out to you is some of the evidence that was left out of this documentary. They had $143,000 in credit card debt. Michael's two sons, his biological sons, had their own massive amounts of credit card debt that he was worried about. In fact, just before Kathleen died, he had messaged his wife, his former wife, the mother of his two sons, saying that he didn't know how he was going to pay for all this and that he couldn't even bring this up to Kathleen because their sons were in such bad debt. For 3 years before she died, they were spending $100,000 more per year than they were bringing in. Most importantly, she was married before, and the reason she left her first husband was because he was cheating on her. Okay? Think about that. So, Michael, we know a lot about Michael, and I would posit to you that he is one of the major storytellers that we hear from in this documentary. Michael, who claimed to have 2 Purple Hearts that he got during his service in the war, but it turned out he only had 1, and it was actually because he got into a car accident in Japan. Michael, who wrote a drunk driving column claiming to promote zero tolerance, yet he had just gotten a DUI a few years before that. Initially in the documentary, he's confronted with his bisexuality by his lawyer, by the private investigator, and I think his response is, "I would never do that." Well, then it comes out, no, everyone knew about my bisexuality, including my wife and all my children, except none of the kids actually knew. And every time he was asked, well, did Kathleen know? He could never give a direct answer. It was always something like, well, it was implied. He was interviewed in 2017, and I'm going to read this directly. Quote, "I never talked to a soul about it. It's like when you get away with something, you keep getting away with it. It becomes, oh, it's all right." That was in reference to his bisexuality. But this is who we're talking about here. This is our storyteller. He was this big writer. That's what he did for a living, as he told stories, but he was barely bringing any money in compared to Kathleen. He ran for mayor unsuccessfully. That's when we found out about him lying about his Purple Heart. And he also had a book deal ready with HarperCollins during the trial in the event that he was acquitted. Book deal never went through. Liz Ratliff, the German woman, when her husband had died, she was given a $250,000 life insurance policy, and Michael, being the good guy he was, decided that he was going to handle that for her. I personally don't have any information as to what happened when Liz Ratliff died and her inheritance, but it was convenient that he then took over responsibility for her 2 children. I'd also like to point out that he developed a romantic relationship with the editor of The Staircase that lasted until 2017. So let's get to that night. He claimed that she was still breathing when he found her at the bottom of the staircase. Well, paramedics said that when they arrived, she had been dead for quite some time. And how did they know this? They knew this because the blood was dry. The blood was too congealed for a fall that had just happened. And we later found out that there were red neurons present in the blood on her scalp. And you only see those when there's been 2 hours or more lack of oxygen to the brain. And if I'm getting that science wrong, you guys can correct me on that. Also, there was a cleanup. Under her body and under her head were paper towels, Michael's socks, Michael's shoes. If your wife is sitting there dying, breathing her last breath, what are you doing taking your shoes off and wiping things around? Luminol showed that there were footsteps leading from the scene of her death to the kitchen to the wine glass cabinet, and that there was a bloody fingerprint on that cabinet. Next to that cabinet were 2 wine glasses, neither of which had Kathleen's fingerprints on them. Why is this significant? Because if you want to make it look like an accidental fall, it's a better tell if you've got an empty bottle of wine and 2 glasses to signal that she had been wasted and drinking all night. But we know she wasn't intoxicated because she could have driven a car safely and been under the legal limit at that point. There are no injuries on her body that suggest a fall. She didn't have bruising that I'm aware of on her body. I bruise easily and I fall and I'm clumsy. And if I fall, I have bruises on me. We didn't see anything like that on her body. Furthermore, and I think this is probably the most significant piece of evidence that I cannot believe was not mentioned in the documentary, is that according to the coroner's report, there was a bloodied fracture with hemorrhage on the small extension off of the left thyroid cartilage. What does that mean? Bruising on her neck, okay? That is inconsistent with a fall. That is consistent with strangulation. And if we have time during the Q&A, I'd love to hear more about that from the doctors. So the owl theory, okay? Meanwhile, this is the only reason I agreed to be on this panel. But I think there's no coincidence that Liz Ratliff had 7 lacerations on her scalp when she died. Kathleen Peterson also had 7 lacerations on her scalp. That would have been 2 very similar owls who attacked these 2 women across an ocean from one another, if we're going to believe the owl theory. I'm just going to end by saying that the fact that we're all here and that people have such strong opinions about this show indicates that stories and the stories we tell are powerful. And with great power comes great responsibility. Because stories have consequences. The people who watch these shows are going to be the people sitting on your juries who are going to feel like they can't trust anything that they hear anymore. And we live in a world of Me Too. We live in a world of fake news. We live in a different world now where we have to question the information we're getting, who's telling us these stories, and what they have to gain by it. And if we're being told a story where we're hearing more about a man's sex life than we are about a woman's career and who she was, this woman whose life was taken too soon, it makes you wonder, is this the kind of story that I want to promote? So I urge you, not as lawyers, but as people, to take responsibility and have integrity in what you do and how you tell your stories. And search for truth and not just winning, because there are losers everywhere. Kathleen was a loser in this case, but she's somebody that the filmmakers all but forgot in how they portrayed this story. So, don't want to end on a dark note, but thank you for giving me a chance to fill that stuff in.
Wow, 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 wow.
How about we talk about the owl?
Please, please.